You awaken to the faint, rhythmic hum of the earth itself, a distant tremor that ripples through the floorboards and into your bones, as if the planet is breathing its own secret beneath your feet. In the half-darkness, memories of a 1930s sear flicker at the edge of your mind. Edgar Cayce's warning of earth changes, a prophecy that once seemed the stuff of fevered dreams. And yet here we stand in 2025, with the U.S. Geological Survey reporting a 12% uptick in magnitude 6.0 earthquakes over the past 5 years, while NASA's latest satellite altimetry confirms an accelerating sea level rise of nearly 4 millimeters per year, metrics that Cayce could never have measured, but eerily anticipated in spirit. As you listen, the narrative shifts from mystic murmurs to cold, hard data, from the lab-coated scientists logging tremor after tremor to a lone narrator tracing those quake-scarred fault lines on a glowing map. Then, like the crescendo of a storm, the story converges. A cataclysmic quake tears through a coastal city, its rising waters evidence of melting polar ice caps lashing the flooded streets. In that instant, prophecy and reality collide, leaving you suspended between wonder and disbelief. Yet even as the ground settles, the questions remain. Are we witnessing the long-foretold earth changes, or simply the logical outcome of a planet under stress? Tonight, you'll not only hear the echoes of Cayce's trance visions, but also the latest scientific reports that chart our ever-shifting world, an electrifying blend of myth and modernity that builds to a pulse-pounding climax where memory meets reality and the future hangs tremulous in the balance. In the flickering half-light of trance, Edgar Cayce emerges as both prophet and presm, a Georgia farm boy whose whispered visions in the 1930s foretold an age he called Earth Changes, when the planet itself would convulse and reforge its face. He spoke of great tremors waking deep beneath California's fractured crust and of mountain ranges buckling like ancient scrolls, all heralded by poles that would lean and drift, tipping the world out of its delicate balance. His voice, lilting and distant, painted images of glaciers unspooling their frozen rivers into angry seas, and of sunken continents Atlantis, reborn on the shifting tides, rising like a ghost from the depths. Today, his arcane prophecies brush against cold, hard science. Just last year, the European Space Agency's GRACE satellites recorded the Greenland ice sheet losing nearly 280 billion tons of ice enough water to push global sea levels higher. With each passing month, while geophysicists chart the Earth's magnetic north wandering with unprecedented speed toward Siberia, a subtle prelude to the pole shift Cayce envisaged. Yet beneath these numbers lies a larger drama. Imagine standing on a coastal bluff as the ground quivers, watching the horizon swell with water once locked in polar vaults. Picture researchers in white coats huddled over seismographs, eyes widening, as the needles dance beyond known patterns, as if reading the planet's secret heartbeat. Then, in a crescendo of seismic fury, a magnitude 7 quake rends a coastal city, its streets drowned by the very waves that scientists warn are inching ever higher each year. In that moment, the mystical and the empirical collide cases. Century-old dreams of upheaval crystallize in the roiling chaos of 2025. And when the aftershocks fade, we are left to wonder, is this cataclysm the inevitable roar of a world under siege by climate and tectonic forces, or the echo of a seer's voice crying across the decades? The answer, perhaps, lies somewhere between myth and measurement, in the trembling threshold where memory meets reality, and where Cayce's legacy still whispers in the Earth's restless depths. In a voice that seems to ripple through time itself, Edgar Cayce carved his predictions carved in the ether, like runes on the wind warnings of upheavals, so vast they would remake the very bones of the Earth. He spoke first of a monumental pole shift, an axis realignment that would tip continents and rearrange skies. And today, We watch the magnetic north wander with unnerving speed over 50 miles in just the past decade, its drift a subtle portent of the cataclysm he foresaw. Then, as if tracing fault lines in the air, he described great tremors that would rend California's fractured crust and shake the ancient foundations of Japan. Scientists tally a 12% rise in magnitude 6.0 plus earthquakes since 2020, from the ridge crest sequence in 2023 to the lingering aftershocks off Fukushima, each seismic whisper echoing Cayce's trance-induced vision. His warning of melting polar ice and dramatic sea level rise resonates with chilling precision now that NASA's GRACE satellites report Greenland alone bleeding nearly 280 billion tons of ice each year, pushing global shorelines upward by nearly 4 millimeters annually and drowning low-lying cities in the slow drip of forgotten glaciers. In the same breath, he conjured images of Atlantis, resurfacing ghostly remnants of a sunken civilization riding the tides, and while marine geologists have yet to pluck an Atlantean ruin from abyssal plains, deep-sea surveys reveal anomalous sediment plumes and submerged high relief features on the mid-Atlantic ridge that keep the legend alive beneath echo sounders. Beneath these major portents lie his minor but no less haunting predictions. Sudden, blinding solar flares erupting from the sun's roiling surface. And indeed, we are living through solar cycle 25's peak, with NOAA issuing frequent geomagnetic storm alerts as X-class flares rip open Earth's magnetic defenses and paint auroras farther south than ever recorded. He foresaw hurricane superstorms swallowing coastlines whole in Hurricane Eon's 2022 fury, followed by Otis's record-breaking rapid intensification in 2023, aligned with his vision of tempests magnified by warmer seas. Even social upheaval was writ in his etheric scrolls. Cayce spoke of mass migrations and civil unrest born of elemental fury, and we now bear witness to climate-driven displacements and protests, stretching from the flooded plains of Bangladesh to wildfire-scarred towns in California. Yet these scientific data points, as precise as any gauge or seismograph, do nothing to dampen the thrill of the unseen of a man in another century, laying down a spectral map of our planet's future that seems to pulse with life in each new dataset. Imagine then, standing on a trembling deck, watching the northern lights shimmer across a sky remapped by a shifting axis, while below, instruments tally ice melt and quake counts in silent testament to a prophecy that sounds more like fact with every rising tide and every rattling fault line. As Cayce's words swell to their dramatic climax, we find ourselves at a crossroads between myth and measurement, staring into the ether where his carved predictions still drift part legend, part science, and wondering whether the Earth's next great chapter will be written in data points or in dreams. You settle into a dimly lit study, the glow of your laptop casting long shadows as you scroll through the USGS earthquake catalog from 2019 to 2024, each entry a tremor in the ledger of our restless planet. In Cayce's trance, he declared that California will fall into the sea, a chilling prophecy of coastal cities swallowed by a yawning abyss. Yet the records tell a more nuanced tale. While no swath of the Golden State has plunged wholesale beneath the waves, USGS data registers a dozen magnitude 7.0 and above quakes over this half-decade, Ridgecrest's 2023 shocks rattling oiled rigs and fraying nerves, the 2024 Mendocino temblor bending steel rails and splitting highways. Along the Pacific Ring of Fire, Japan endures a similar litany of powerful jolts, from Hokkaido's 2020 rupture to the Kyushu aftershocks that still hum beneath sleeping towns. The frequency of these mega-quakes has crept upward. USGS tallies reveal roughly 95 such events since 2019, a figure about 12% higher than the preceding 5 years, hinting at a planet growing more volatile under stress. Beneath this seismic ledger is the slow dance of tectonic plates. GPS stations show the Pacific plate edging northwest at nearly 5 centimeters per year, grinding inexorably against North America's margin. You imagine the fault lines as scratching, knives in the Earth's crust, each slippage a breath in the planet's secret life. Then, in a breathless moment, you feel it, a low rumble vibrating through the floorboards, as though Cayce's century-old vision has tapped you on the shoulder. The narrative peaks as you leap from your chair, heart-hammering, to witness live. Seismograph needles leaping off their charts, a primal echo of every prophecy and every data point converging in a single pulse of geologic fury. In that suspended heartbeat, between the poetic dread of California falling and the clinical solidity of USGS numbers, you confront the true power of earthquake ledger, not in certainties, but in the trembling space where myth and measurement meet at last. You find yourself alone in a deserted seaside radio shack, the salty night air humming through cracked windows as you tune an old VHF receiver to the steady hiss of tide gauges half a world away. In the dim glow of phosphorescent screens, Cayce's century-old warning, the polar ice shall melt and the seas shall claim the shore, feels less like prophecy and more like an urgent dispatch from a planet in distress. As you trace the jagged graph lines streaming in from NASA's Jason 3 and Sentinel-6 satellites, you see the truth in cold numbers. Since 2019, global mean sea level has climbed at an average rate of about 3 millimeters per year, edging upward, faster with each passing season, a relentless tide that shows no mercy to low-lying lands. Yet raw data can't capture the shudder of disbelief when local listeners call in. I walked the old boardwalk last night, one voice trembles, and by sunrise it was under 2 feet of brine. You picture the weathered planks the same. Boards your grandfather danced on during summer festivals, now submerged, their balustrades dripping with briny tears. Then you switch channels to a network of coastal stations, relaying real-time readings, Norfolk's gauge registering an unseen high water mark. Manila Bay's sensors warning of encroaching saltwater that'll soon poison freshwater wells. Each report feels like a drumbeat in a dirge for vanishing coastlines. Yet between these human stories and satellite snapshots lies a deeper drama. The vast glaciers of Greenland and Antarctica, once static monoliths of ice, are fracturing and cascading into the sea, a frozen army surrendering to rising temperatures. Just last month, scientists using laser altimetry reported an acceleration in ice-lost Greenland's annual melt rate, jumping by nearly 15% since 2019, fueling the inexorable rise in our tide tables. You imagine the poles as celestial, balances tipped by unseen hands, and wonder if Cayce foresaw not only the melting ice, but this precise acceleration, a planetary fever taking hold. In the Radio Shack's eerie quiet, your narrative shifts from spectral murmurs to forensic scrutiny. Charts flicker between historical baselines and today's alarming spikes. You annotate each peak, each local anecdote, against the backdrop of climate models forecasting another half-millimeter climb each year if greenhouse gas emissions remain unchecked. Then, as the midnight tide reaches its zenith, the shacks doors rattle in the rising wind, and you feel the sea's hungry breath on your neck. In that moment of cinematic tension, the mystical warning and scientific reality converge. Cayce's vision of drowning shores has unfolded into nightly news, bulletins, and submerged boardwalks. When the final tide gauge reading bleeps into silence, you close the logbook on Reality Check 2, the rising tide, knowing that the next chapter won't be written on paper, but on the shifting sands at the edge of our world, where every millimeter of rise is a story of loss, adaptation, and the eerie truth that prophecy and data can sometimes speak with the same voice. Beneath the rolling swells, a gleaming corer plunges into the abyssal mud, hauling aloft a cylindrical record of Earth's hidden drama's dark, murky bands that whisper of ancient deluges and tectonic upheavals. In Cayce's trance-woven tapestry, Atlantis would re-emerge from its ocean grave. Today, marine geologists peer at these sediment cores dated from 2020 to 2025, hunting for the echoes of such a resurgence. As you crack open the core, your flashlight beam trembles over layers where coarse, sand-laden strata abruptly give way to fine silts rich in organic detritus, signature of massive turbidity currents triggered by catastrophic floods or undersea landslides. In 2023, a NOAA expedition mapped anomalous sediment plumes stretching for miles along the mid-Atlantic ridge, suggesting recent surges of material sweeping down submarine canyons, events that could hint at the ghostly awakening of sunken landmasses Cayce named in his prophecies. Yet when you run grain-size analyses, the shifts are subtle. A marginal increase in granule fraction here, a slight uptick in marine organic carbon there, consistent with more frequent storm-driven floods pouring terrestrial debris into the Balkri Sea rather than the literal rise of Atlantean ruins. Still, even this modest anomaly feels electrifying, as though you're holding a piece of the planet's memory in your gloved hand. Switching between the arcane allure of prophecy and the clinical rigor of lab assays, you chart each layer's composition against core samples from the previous decade, noting a 10% increase in coarse particle deposition since 2022 and uptick that aligns with more intense hurricanes dumping sediment into shelf waters. Then, in the hull's dim belly, the core's echo sounder signals a ridge crest bulge rising a few centimeters, too slight to be a sunken city peeking above the waves, yet enough to stir the imagination. In that charged moment, you stand. At the nexus of myth and measurement, Cayce's Atlantis flickers in every grain-size histogram and organic content profile, each data point a footnote to his vision. As the ship's engines hum and the core's labels tally dates and depths, you feel the pulse of the deep sea speaking through science, translating ancient prophecy into the precise, quantitative language of modern geology, and reminding you that even the densest layers of mystery can be read, if only we listen. A low electric hum builds in the lab just as dusk bleeds into night, and you recall Cayce's whispered caution. The sun would flare with a fury unmatched, and the storms it unleashed would test the very soul of humanity. Suddenly, the lights go out, an abrupt blackout that plunges your instruments into darkness and leaves only the phosphorescent glow of a lone geomagnetic storm monitor. According to NOAA, as latest solar cycle 25 data, we've already weathered 3 X-class flares this year alone, each eruption sending charged particles racing toward Earth's magnetosphere and igniting auroras as far south as Texas. Cayce spoke of a solar wrath so potent it would fry our communications and bring nations to their knees. In the pitch black, you fumble for a flashlight, heart pounding against the hush of interrupted power. Outside, the wind rises in a hungry howl, echoing IPCC reports of ever-intensifying hurricanes and deluges. The 6th assessment warns that, since 2010, Category 4 and 5 storms have increased in frequency by nearly 15%, their spiraling eyes marking the fury Cayce foresaw. Your lab's backup generator sputters, and for a moment you wonder if this is prophecy or coincidence. Yet the data are clear. Solar activity is peaking, and extreme weather is no longer a distant specter, but a daily headline. You switch on your handheld spectrum analyzer, its screen alive with dancing lines as it records geomagnetic fluctuations strong enough to threaten satellites and power grids. Then, with a creak and a jolt, the lights flicker back to life, revealing your colleagues' anxious faces illuminated by the flickering lab screens. In that charged instant, mysticism and measurement collide, a metaphysical dare and a scientific challenge. As you log the outage alongside solar indices and storm warnings, you sense that Cayce's vision wasn't merely metaphorical. It was a summons to witness the tangled interplay of sun, storm, and soul, and to prepare for the next surge of cosmic and climatic upheaval that looms on our horizon. You perch on a windswept rooftop, the city's glittering grid stretching out beneath you like a circuit of human ambition, each light a heartbeat in the uneasy hush that follows the latest storm. In one hand, you clutch Cayce's weathered trance transcript, the specter of Earth changes, whispering through its yellowed pages. In the other, your phone glows with the latest IPCC summary, reminding you that 2024 was the hottest year on record, and that atmospheric CO now hovers above 420 ppm levels unseen in millions of years. A chill wind skitters across your skin as you ask yourself, are these tremors and floods the fulfillment of a psychic's prophecy, or simply the measurable fallout of industrial excess? Below, the neon haze wavers in the night air, tinted by particulate plumes from wildfires that have scorched record acreage across Siberia and Canada. This summer events that echo Cayce's vision of flaming skies, yet are meticulously catalogued in NOAA's annual fire report. Your breath clouds before you, a white flag in the darkness, as you wrestle with the dual truths of myth and measurement. Every flicker on the distant horizon, whether a lighthouse beam or a refinery, flare feels charged with meaning, teetering between omen and ordinary fact. Then, in a moment of stark clarity, a distant rumble rolls through the city, perhaps a passing train, perhaps something more. Your heart races as you gaze upward, half expecting to see auroras, born of recent solar storms, but finding only the familiar constellations recast by urban glow. It is here, suspended between the cold logic of data and the warm insistence of memory, that you confront the true wilderness, the boundary where prophecy and science blur. As the night deepens and the city's pulse steadies, you realize that the only certainty lies in bearing witness, holding space for both Cayce's haunted whispers and the unflinching clarity of modern climate records, so that, come dawn, you will know whether you are a chronicler of prophecy, of change, or of both. A trembling calm settles over the world in the wake of our investigations, aftershocks, both literal and figurative, that ripple through Earth's ledger and our collective psyche. In the laboratory, seismographs continue to register a modest uptick, about 12% more magnitude, 7 quakes since 2020, while tide gauges chart a relentless climb of roughly 4 millimeters per year in global sea levels, a rate that scientists warn could double by mid-century if emissions remain unchecked. Yet these empirical truths neither fully vindicate nor utterly falsify Cayce's century-old visions. His earth changes echo in every tremor and every flood, but the patterns diverge in the details no single pole shift has dumped California into the sea, nor has Atlantis resurfaced in the mid-Atlantic turbidity fields, though sediment cores hint at more powerful undersea currents and twice the organic deposition in this decade alone. Above, solar cycle 25's X-class flares still dance on NOAA as monitors, and IPCC reports chronicle surging Category 5 storms that lash coasts with hurricane winds stronger than any storm of the 1930s, suggesting Cayce's flaring skies, or more prescient metaphor than pinpoint forecast. In this suspense-charged moment, we stand at a crossroads where myth and measurement converge. The data whisper truths of a planet under pressure, yet the veiled poetry of prophecy remains, alive in every anomaly and every unexplained spike. So we face the unknown not as passive observers of fate, but as curious custodians of planetary history. We may not know exactly what tomorrow holds, but we can read the records beneath our feet and above our heads, weaving together the silent testimony of rocks, ice, and solar storms into a guide for the future, and perhaps, in doing so, transform prophecy into preparation. A hush falls as you close the final page of the seismograph log, its inked tremor trails still fresh under your fingers, an archive of every quake that has quivered beneath our feet, every tremble that Cayce might have intuited in his visions. Outside, the moon rises, pale and patient, casting a silver shimmer across a sea that continues its inexorable climb, its surface punctuated by the gentle swell of waves now a little higher than they were last year. In Cayce's luminous dream, these upheavals would herald a spiritual golden age, a time when humanity would awaken to its deepest unity. Today, we arm ourselves with satellites and sensors, climate models and emission targets, our stewardship grounded in data and driven by urgency. Yet as the tide laps against the shore, reclaiming bits of sand with each crest, you sense that science and spirit may not be at odds, but two strands of the same living tapestry, one mapping the mechanisms of change, the other urging us toward transformation of heart. You lean on the railing, the salt air cool against your cheek, and wonder whether this moment caught between mystical yearning and technical resolve might be the true threshold of rebirth. For in the interplay of moonlight and rising waters, prophecy and measurement, we find a path forward, not in choosing between Cayce's golden age or our common ground, but in weaving them together so that each tremor logged and each tide charted becomes an invitation to deeper wisdom. And as you stand there, the night's hush broken only by the sea's soft cadence, you realize that the future will be shaped not by cataclysm alone, but by how we read the signs and rise to meet them together. Under this same rising moon,